A little bit of background. When did you first start practicing? When was that?
About 62, 63, I think.
And was that karate or was it? Did you?
Karate, yeah.
Right. Okay. And that was with Harada Sensei.
No, there was a period at the Heart where some students of Abi Sensei was teaching.
Oh, right. He's a judo guy.
Yeah, but he came from the Butoku Kwai, and he studied a variety of martial arts, including Aikido,
Right.
Kenjutsu, Naginata,
Right.
plus the classic Chinese things. And he came along and taught karate,
Right.
but he wasn't a specialist in karate. And he invited Harada Sensei over, who's then, I think, in Belgium.
Yeah.
And he gave a demonstration at the Albert Hall and gave some classes at, I forget the name of the dojo in central London. And we went along there, a few of us from the Heart, I think only two of us, 2 or 3 of us, and did his first lessons in England.
Right.
And so that's when I think that was 63.
Right. Okay.
62 might be.
Right. 63. And you were practicing with Harada Sensei for the next 7 or 8 years, something like that.
It was getting close to 8 years, yes.
Right. And you became his closest student.
Yeah, I was what then we could call an uchideshi,
Yeah.
inside. Yeah. And I travelled around Britain. Well, as you know, in those days, karate was blooming. It was in a period of opening. So there's lots of opportunities to open dojos. There's a lot of interest in karate. And we went to numerous places from Glasgow, Edinburgh, Newcastle, Sheffield, Plymouth, Portsmouth, what else is it? Swansea, Cardiff, Kent. There's a few others I think I'm forgetting about.
Right. So after those 8 years, you probably have heard a lot about Harada Sensei's upbringing in karate, as it were, and probably you would have talked a lot about what he was doing in Japan, the fact that he had contact with Funakoshi and
yes.
so on.
Well, the first thing was that I actually felt I was getting very stale.
Right.
I've been practicing about 7 years then, but it was quite full-time practice. I was at least 4 of those years. I was full-time,
Right.
and I was going away 3-4 weekends,
Yeah.
plus all the weekly practices, plus my own practice. So sometimes I just call it an 8-day-a-week sort of practice. And I got stale. I'm getting a bit tired of it, and I wanted to go to Japan and meet the Gami Sensei,
Yeah.
really, which I did do. And I had an introduction to him. I stayed with a friend of Gami Sensei's. And he, as you know, he spoke about Gami Sensei
Yeah, a lot.
a lot, and those years he had with him in very respectful and
Very
kind.
respectful.
Yeah.
In fact, I think when I spoke to him about it, he would say Agami Sensei was more responsible for his development than, say, Funakoshi had been. Anybody before that?
Yeah, I think so. I would say so. It's definitely a big change.
Yeah. So so Harada Sensei hadn't been to Japan for a long time at that point,
That's right.
and there'd been a lot of change taking place. What was the change that you noticed from 8 years practicing with Harada Sensei in the KDS, and suddenly you're practicing with Harada Sensei's most respected master, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I went to see Gami Sensei, which is another event in itself, and very powerful, and a strong impression because I was only 24 then, 23. Yeah. So you can imagine I was a very eager student and full of like anticipation, aspiration. And he said go to Gakushuin, which is, they had 3 universities that you could practice in then. The other was Chuan Major, I think it was. And I went there, it was on a Saturday morning. There was one other foreigner there called Martin, he was a French guy who was living in Japan teaching English. And it's a bit hard to put in short words really. First of all, everything was said in Japanese, so I couldn't really understand much. And there's very little explanation. And the word nearest I can think is chaotic to my eyes then.
Right.
The practice seemed chaotic. There was no forms that you could sort of get into.
Right.
It was complete energy. In fact, I think, see, the whole theme of the practice was to take out and empty yourself as much as you can in practice. Just let go completely. So whatever form you might start with, you do that so completely and encourage it so completely that within a few minutes there wouldn't be much form there. You know. And you'll end up sort of going around on the floor, standing up, falling down. And I often, at that time, wondered what it was about. You know, I really couldn't get the point of it, and I didn't understand what was happening. You know, we jump a lot, then run, and then we do this thing, touching, my Gary standing up. But that would be 40 or 50 minutes, and sometimes you couldn't get off the floor, so I was kind of a bit confused. And but what I did notice, that a number of the students had terrific movement, powerful, beautiful, graceful, but penetrating movement. Not all of them, but some had. And I could see that, and it was obvious. And obviously they were gifted, but they caught of what something that he was trying to teach about space and movement and energy.
Can I just interrupt there and say, it must have been very difficult for Agami at that point, because that would be a big move away from what maybe the Shotokai was practicing over there.
Yeah, I think it was. You know, he's obviously taken some big steps forward, and he's experimented with karate, and a lot of them really didn't understand what the process was he was looking for.
Yeah.
You know, and he was working with things that seemed very strange at the time. Now we look at them and we sort of think, well, that's for this or that. We're searching this, but at that time it looked, as you know, in most artistic movements, the opening phases of an art seem a bit chaotic, and in some terms people don't understand what's happening and they reject it.
Right.
So I think that happened, you know.
Because as you remember, and I remember it very well, even Harada Sensei himself in the UK was considered to be outside of the normal world of what karate was at the time.
Well, I want to sort of, in many ways, give Harada Sensei his due, because he took a big step forward from the karate we knew, or what was in Europe. So it was what we would call advanced thinking, advanced movement, or way of using your body. But having gone to see Agami Sensei, I could see it was like a long way from there.
Right.
And one of the other things is my body, although, as you know, we used to do a lot of low fudo, more static, and we used to do kibidachi for an hour. It was very sort of compressed, static movement. And when I went there, I was strong, but I couldn't do the movement they were doing.
Right.
And it took me 3 or 4 months for my body, not only in terms of the power, but the dynamic energy, that's what it's called, to be able to follow them.
Right. Did you not think at that point, were you not starting to doubt whether you're in the right place or not?
Yes. Well, I put it in this book I wrote about, there's a section about history. I felt I was standing and being told to dig a pit without shovels. Right. I just really didn't know what I was doing, and I wondered what I was doing there, and all these dreams I had were sort of like, well, what have I come here for? You know? But I carried on, and gradually my body changed in different ways, and the energy in the body changed. Then I could start to follow the gori, which is very different than with Harada Sensei. Very, very different. And then I could start to actually get the movement and energy together. So I started doing things that I never could do before when I was with Harada Sensei. You know, when I first started, I couldn't do it. It was impossible. And it was something like an explosion of energy with a stability behind it. It was something, it's hard to describe, but and at the same time, just around about 3 months, I met a student of Aoki Sensei, who Agami Sensei had mentioned, and that took me on another route. So
you've practiced with Harada Sensei, you've experienced Agami Sensei now, this great master, and now you're introduced to Aoki, who clearly had a big impression on you as well.
Yeah, the first time I went to meet, I met his student, the first time I went to meet him, he was teaching. It was a little tiny dojo, because they didn't have a dojo at that time, and he had hired this, it was like a small hall. And he had a few students, and I was really surprised, because he's a big teacher, I thought he had a big group. But because he had actually gone even further away from the core or the orthodox Shotokai, he was in a way even more isolated. He had a very small group of very powerful students. And we practiced a bit, and then he said, "Oh, attack me," and I thought, "Well, okay, I'll give you the best shot." And he did Muso Ken and it almost broke my arm,
Right.
I couldn't move my arm. And I thought, well, he doesn't look like he's using a lot of power. He obviously is. And there's something I haven't found, and it was kind of a shock for me. And then, because he did some movements there, which I was kind of impressed as a young man, but also the energy. So
how old would he be then?
He was 33, 34.
Right. So he's quite young as well.
Oh yeah, he was young then, yeah. Yeah, he would have been, he's 11 years older than me.
And just going on that small dojo thing, was that typical in Japan at that time?
No.
The dojos being universities?
No, in university, this is something that he had for one evening a week to try to introduce some new people.
Right.
And he'd teach there occasionally, because he had a lot of these high-level students at that time, so they would teach it. He just happened to be there. And then we went back to his house after, because we had tea there, and he was talking. We slept at 2 or 3, and he's got a very nice energy, very, very open, very warm, but also very vibrant energy.
Right.
And so I carried on practicing with his student in a park in Tokyo, and we'd go every morning. It wasn't raining, so it could be 4 times a week, 5 times, or sometimes 2 times.
Yeah.
And we basically did the same thing. We'd jump around this football pitch 5 times.
Yeah.
And then we run up and down it 10 times. Then we did this key one.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it doesn't seem to be a lot of technique involved in this, but what it was doing, it was really opening the power of your body and the energy to move. So when we started doing kind of more technical movement, there was a lot of speed, dynamic power and space in the movements. And then that carried on. I did one big gashiku with Aoki Sensei and Lekudinkai. Then I went back to England for a year, then went back again.
And when you went back and you were there, about 5 years would that be?
Yeah, I went back after a year and a bit, saved enough money. I was teaching in France then, didn't have a group in England. And then I went back and lived with the personal group of Aoki Sensei. It's called Lekudinkai, which means to be optimistic, or to rest calmly or peacefully, something like that. And he had a group of 15 to 18 to 20 people that's varied, who lived in this big 2 houses, lived together. And we practiced in the park. It was on a hill. And we had 3 classes a week in Tokyo, 4 classes a week in Tokyo, which just go to. So it was quite a intensive.
Yeah. And by the time you were ready to come back to the UK, would you then at that point be considered a senior student in that group?
Yeah, I was what they call the young Lekudinkai. There was the older, which was not that big difference, but in the time it happened. And I was in Shintaido then. It was very young, so I became an instructor then, and I came back. So I wasn't like a senior instructor, but we call it junior instructor, I suppose, an apprenticeship. And and he sort of more or less said, go back and find the roots in England.
And what did you find when you came back? You'd been gone by
Not
then
much.
a few years, hadn't you? You'd been gone a few years by then. And
well, I found a lot of open fields of practicing, but I didn't have any students. And as you know, see, when I left Shotokai, I didn't take anybody, I didn't want to, but what I've understood from what you've said, and I don't mind saying this, I think that I was kind of like, I don't know, what's the word to say really, blanked out is the best word to say it, but I was blanked out, and
I think excommunicated.
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, that's right. Excommunicated, and there was no recognition, and kind of best hidden. I really don't know the reasons for that, because actually it's in the same groups, same lineage, and there didn't need to be any sort of fear or kind of apprehension behind what I was doing, other than that people didn't want to know, want people to know what I was doing. But I practiced on my own for about 6 months, and then met an old student of Harada Sensei who joined in with me, and then group, and slowly built up a core group and a commune, and I kind of made a mini small Lakurinkai for a few years, and then I took them all to Japan, and they had their Japan experience.
Right, okay, and how long was that then, when they went with you? How long was that?
Well, it depends. Some stayed for about 9 months, some paid for a year and a half. I took 15 students, which was big thing then.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was all the students I had really, and I took them because they couldn't understand some aspects of the Keiko, because I was the only example, and they couldn't understand some aspects of how to practice. They didn't have other people as examples.
Right.
And I thought they needed that education. In Japan, they're very subtle and sensitive and very fine on the ways of doing things.
Okay. So talk a little bit now about standing back a little and looking at the last, whatever it is, so many years, 20 or 30 years. What would you say are the big developments? What are the developments that you've experienced from your early days? What if you had to describe karate now to someone, what would you say it was?
Well, it was.
Yeah.
Well, I put it the way I would say now, it's a movement form that develops particular aspects of energy and forms, but is limited in the way that you can express yourself and express your energy.
Right.
So I know that sounds a bit odd, but it definitely develops very powerful certain aspects, but it's limited in the expressive content and the spontaneous content, particularly also. So if we think of ourselves as a human being, and you have some parts which are like a solid core, but you also have parts which we could call like the fire or heart, or when Aoki attention goes to this birth part, you see, it's that part of release release of expression, emotion, release into space, letting go, and definitely Agami said made a big step towards that.
Yeah.
It was a big step.
Yeah.
And Aoki Sensei made another step, and I brought another aspect in, which I felt for myself was missing, and also at that stage I felt was missing in Shintaido.
Right.
And it's not completed, these things are going to be completed, but
so with the Shintaido and you learn loads of stuff with Harada Sensei and you go through Agami Sensei and Aoki, and you've got your own experiences. What I'm interested in now a little bit is, what did you learn outside of that you brought into it, that was important for you?
Before I go on, there's one thing I wanted to say a few words about Master Aoki, because he had probably the most profoundest effect on the development of practice, and not only because of him as a person, because the environment I was living in, Lakurinkai, and being the only foreigner there, and in those days. So, and he's a very charismatic person and totally an artist, and could be quite chaotic, and it was difficult for a lot of people to follow him, to be honest. It was quite challenging, and I think a lot of people have a problem following him. But it was very challenging, not only in the practice, but as a living teacher.
Right.
So I just wanted to mention that, because that step, as Agami Sensei was quite a, you could say, an extreme person. He was as well.
But that whole idea of chaos is so opposite to the culture in Japan.
Yes. Well, the practice one thing that he developed, was this very yang, open practice, you see. And we're used to that in the West. I mean, rock and roll music came here, and artistic expression is very open. In Japan, it's a much more controlled yin energy, and you follow a certain form. So what he's doing is very, very radical over there. But for a Western, it perhaps wasn't so radical.
Right.
The forms were, or not so form they weren't, the movement was, but it wasn't such a radical thing to be expressive. Like for Japanese it was, so he was taking a big step.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, so back to the question then. What did you learn outside of the practice of karate that you brought in that made a difference?
Well, I suppose partly, you see, you have to look at your own practice and how you are to see what's missing,
Right.
what you need, and then also what you feel from a distance, what was perhaps not in the practice. And you see, Shintaido, Aoki Sensei started developing Kitaido when he was young, 28, 29, and a major period to it is like 35, 36. And that was a big core of the Kitaido program. He was very young, powerful and yang. And later on he developed a more internal part, but it was the majority, I think, of the practice, very open, powerful, and that's how we practice.
Right.
And it's beautiful. But the internal part of the practice, the surrendering part, was for me missing.
Right.
And so when I came back, I like I did with karate, I stopped practicing Shintaido. When I left, not when I came back, when I left Shintaido, let's put it that way, because I felt it would influence the energy and feeling and ideas I wanted to find. And it was a bit of a difficult time because I didn't know what I was searching for. Really, you don't look for something; you're just searching, you know. And I felt that something in myself was missing there. And I went along I saw a diploma course being advertised at Froburg College by Martha Leventhal, and it was dance movement therapy, which I didn't really know much about. I thought, okay, that sounds an interesting thing, and I wanted to study more about movement. And I always put Shintaido as a movement form, movement system. And when I went there and I started moving, she was like, "What are you doing?" I was so strong in the classes, and she couldn't understand my energy. And she said, "Wow, what are you doing now?" So she said, "Yeah, but it's the same energy you're using, you know." And anyway, there's a lot of improvisation in this, a lot of reflection, a lot of ways of. We had different teachers coming in, quite challenging to pull you out different ways of perspectives of movement, and body images, and a lot of stuff, a lot of theoretical stuff. So it really put me outside of this martial art world, really outside.
Yeah.
And we're doing improvisations with people that had no forms, you know, and shapes, and you really, anything you had an idea about, you know, a form, a movement, you know, shape and energy would be taken off. So it was like going back to a bit of a blank canvas,
Right.
which I found very interesting, see. And at the same time I started practice with Master Genpo Zen, and that is really self-reflection.
Yeah.
It's not reflecting on the ego itself, but reflecting in what's there. And you sit, as you know, you sit, and it's very yin, you know, but the sitting posture itself is yang. So, and having conversations with him and his guidance, it really got a shift into me thinking about the movement from what I'd learned and what was in my body. And you see, this open movement that Gami Sensei and Aoki developed was something that I inherited and I still use. And it wasn't something just for men, it was a way that they brought into the open. But it was also a kind of like, it was too strong, it's like too much light. I'm blinded by it,
Yeah.
you know. So I had to shift to get in the dark a little bit, in the shadow.
Right.
And that's what the process I was working on. So I had a small group and I started working a lot, and then we got this centre and did a lot of experiments here, working, doing different movements, sitting, internal movements, developing different kata, different kumite, and this kind of like sutemi, they call it in Japanese, surrendering, rather than affirming. See, Eiko is affirming your existence.
Yeah.
Not I'm here, but this is life. and Sutem is like surrendering.
Right.
It's quite a big difference.
Yeah.
You know. So this was some of the process I worked on then.
So Ken, if you could, the experiences and the variety of experiences that you've spoken to us about today, if you were to be able to distill your learning from those and be proffering advice, if you like, to a student, no matter what they're practicing, what might that be?
You see, it's a nice question, but as you know, students from day 1 to day 2 to day 5 to first year, so you change. So the advice you'd give them would change also. I mean, initially you'd say to somebody, come along, just practice, enjoy yourself, and you're receiving them in open ways that they feel comfortable. But there might be another time when you're bearing down on them and concentrating them, get them to let go of things in one way, can be kind of like a pressing down, and it can be a releasing. And one of the big things that I think we all know in martial arts, and it's an old aspect, is just to come empty-handed and try and practice. But that's easily said.
Yeah.
And I always say, well, come, enjoy the practice, enjoy yourself. And what I always say to students is that if you want to learn about your body, the first thing, you need to release tension. That's the first thing. If you've got any tension, well, you get daily accumulated tension, and you get deep, hidden tension. That takes years. But if you start to release tension, a lot of things happen in your mind and body and emotions. And the second is to center yourself in the sense of breathing. So when you release tension, you breathe differently, and you start to inhabit your body. And you have to trust that the body has got a memory and a kind of experience beyond consciousness. Our consciousness is very deep, pre-verbal. So we're not used to that. We're always reflecting what we know. This is something we don't know, we can't grasp. So this is body learning, body language, if you see. It's like a map that you're opening out that you've only seen, but you never entered, And you've got a compass, which could be the teacher, and he can orientate. But you go into the map, the terrain. And the third thing is then you will experience the harmony of that. So release, breathing, harmony. So.
Interesting, really, that you're talking about learning about your body, because probably in the martial arts sense, people don't join with that even thought in their mind. They're wanting to learn something on the outside, something that they can do.
Yeah, I mean, that is usually people come for objectives, and usually it's like that's some dualistic. You'll have, I want this, so I'm going to go for that. There's the teacher on this. So it's always separate, and it's one of the reasons. And I was talking to Colin himself about whether you call what you're doing a martial art or movement. It's always, difficult. So I can say, yes, we practice martial arts, but it's not a martial art. And people get confused with that. But if you start talking about movement, people say, what's movement? But I try to steer away from the objective parts because it blocks people, because they say, well, what's that for? And if you say, well, this is to open you, they say, to open what are you talking about? Or this will settle you, or you will find a releasing this. They're not familiar with this way. Whereas if you say, well, look, I'm going to punch you and do a block, that's simple, but then they get stuck on that. You see, it's like 1, 2, as you know, and it's quite difficult. Usually there's a part where it's quite a challenge where change happens.
So going back to that a little bit, say a little bit more about the part about the map that you talked about.
Well, say you have a terrain that you're not familiar with, and usually we'd understand it from a map, and you're outside of the map. But to tread in the map, you've got to let go of something of the identity of who you are and where you are. And of course, the guiding principles would become from your teacher or the group, and they can orientate you. But once you get in the map, you're looking at it, one thing, but you're not looking at it like a postcard, you're looking at it from your body.
Right.
So you're experiencing, the map is a map of experience.
Right. So this is your internally generated map of your life so far.
Your life and your practice, the practices. Now, it takes a big shift, that, because you're going from a sort of a logical way of looking at practice to an experiential.
Yeah.
Now, of course, practice is always experiential, but you can largely remain in the logical side, if you like, while you're practicing experiential. But what we want to do is shift right to the experiential. And as we just mentioned, that you don't need a reason for movement. The movement is the expression.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying about a waza, that a waza is the expression of the energy and the form at that time. So a movement has its own reason to be.
Yeah.
And you don't need to say, well, it's for this or that, or give it a definition.
Yeah.
But we always hang on definitions.
Absolutely. And since people first go to school, that's
what they're taught.
They're taught that's important to them. But for us, so for example, I often say, Ken, I often say that the distance from where I am to mastery always remains the same, because mastery is the journey.
Yes.
And mastery is the movement.
Yeah. So there's no end to.
Yeah, I'm not trying to do this movement so I'll master it. Mastery is the movement in that sense, you know. And that's a real hard concept again.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the whole thing of guiding people to work on an experiential plane rather than a kind of doing. I'm doing this for something. Is a big shift. It's going from relative to absolute, in a way, what they call in the Zen, the form to emptiness.
Yeah.
And so to get that shift is not easy, and as you know, it takes a lot of sometimes subtle and sometimes strong, sometimes even brutal, like breakthroughs, to realise that, you know, your life is one moment and one time, and everything you do is an expression of completeness, whether it's drinking a cup of tea, you know, making a movement. There's nothing outside of that. But then you've got to drop all these relativistic kind of ideas about your life. Who am I? This, that, and the other.
Yeah.
So in a way, movement is exactly the same path, if you like, or realisation as Zen.
Yeah. But I like that idea. I like the idea that when we move, everything moves or can be moved.
Yeah.
In a sense. So I think oftentimes we offer freedom.
Yes.
And we're offering freedom from that map.
Yeah.
The things on that map that might be making it difficult for them, or the things that are making it easy for them. Freedom.
Well, obviously on a map, and if you go into a territory with the wrong energy, it's like having a beach, and a guy comes along and say, well, that beach looks great, I can build a load of hotels on there. And somebody else can say, well, I can dump a load of shit on there. You know? And someone will say, well, it's a nice beach, maybe I can play on it. Another person will say, well, maybe it's good as it is. And that's how your body is, you know.
Absolutely. And that map can be impoverished, can't it?
Oh yeah.
Or it can be enriched.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, if you think of your body as the map, that's what I was talking about. You're going to a map, and it's learning, again, how to perceive through many subtle aspects, many powerful aspects, many sensations and feelings of the body, in order to bring light into the map. You know, it's like bringing a light, focusing. And usually we start off with like a very narrow beam, and we're just walking around, and then you open it up more as you become more aware and awake as to what that map is. You know, and then kind of mastery is you can walk around the map quite freely, you know, without a compass.
So Ken, thanks very much. That was great.
Okay.
I enjoyed that. There was a